Welcome to this week's deep dive video. We have William Thompson with us again from Phillipsburg Christian Church, and he is a new dad again recently, and he is struggling with sleep. So be praying for him and his wife Shayna that they would find rest and that their girls would continue to grow healthy and strong. And I'm excited to have you, William, even if you are a little sleep deprived. I'm sure it's going to be good.
Yes. Yeah. No. As right, you have editing abilities, so if open mouth insert foot happens, then you're able to just nix that.
It just means a promising blooper reel at the end. That's
yes. But hey, no, thanks for having me. Enjoyed the sermon. I really liked the amount of scripture that you brought into it. The context that you gave in it. And then something that I've got my notes up in front of me, something that I caught, live a life that reflects the calling you have received. I thought that was really good. Super simple application, but it's packed with a whole lot, right? Because especially coming from the example of Paul, who I think he would echo that sentiment, as he says, "Hey, I want you to be like me, except for what you see here, the chains." But that, it can be difficult, right, to live that life that we've called to, that we've received in light of the world that we're living in.
Yeah.
But how much different is this world from the world that Paul had?
Yeah, not very different at all. We just a little bit more technology, but the same temptations, the same distractions, same motivations for people, power and wealth, influence. It's the same world, just a little different skin.
Yeah. So the same darkness pervades around us. It's persistent, trying to push in the gates of the kingdom, but as Jesus says, that it won't happen. And so as ambassadors of that kingdom, we're supposed to be reaching out to those around us. But how is evangelism has changed, right? I remember at one point in time, if you were going to share the gospel, you opened with, "Hey, if you were going to die today, would you go to heaven or hell?" That's sort of moved out of fashion, hasn't it?
Yeah. We don't like talking about hell.
Right.
It makes us uncomfortable. Even myself, it's part of that's learned behavior. But the more that we talk about hell, and it's easy to get even in the church, hot water with people real fast. It's an easy thing to enjoy the love of Jesus, but forget the wrath that's on the other side.
Right.
What John 3:16 through 18, everybody loves 3:16, but you get to 18 and it says, if you don't believe in the only Son of God, you're condemned already. We forget that natural state is condemnation. The thing that changes it is Jesus. And we don't like the reality of hell.
Right. Well, and certainly I think Paul would agree with that sentiment. Look, throughout the book of Acts, his entire message, his entire presentation is to those who are outside in the darkness, the Gentiles, you and I. Unless you're a Jew and I don't know it.
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Yeah. We and of course the gospel is, there is no Jew or Greek, slave or free. We're all at that same opportunity to hear and to receive. But I think we can learn something from Paul and how he presents the message to Agrippa, because that's what he does, right? Would you agree? He's giving, and you pointed this out in the sermon, he is giving a gospel presentation of who Jesus is, what Jesus did for him, and what Jesus can do for Agrippa, and anybody. So how do we do that as Christians without totally because totally offending someone for the bad reasons, right?
Yeah.
How,
Yeah.
in your mind, Cole, how could Paul have changed his message to where he would have still been right in what he was saying, but totally offensive to Agrippa in such a way to where Agrippa's just like, I'm just done listening to you.
Yeah.
I mean,
Where the walls instantly come up, and I think it would be the opposite of Paul's approach, where Paul, he comes in and says, look, this is they've made it them versus me, when he's explaining it to Agrippa. And he says, but I get even where they're coming from. And he goes into how despicable he was. And he shares some of his deepest shame and talks about how kind of a lowly creature he become, that he was leading people into blasphemy, that he was imprisoning people and voting for them to be murdered, and he's going off on all this. And then even includes in all of his accounts of that Damascus thing, he didn't know who the Lord was. Who are you, Lord? And so he comes in from a very sympathetic thing. Look, I didn't know the Lord. I was a terrible person. I had a huge mess, or I'd made a huge mess in my life. And I think if he had come in saying, Agrippa, everybody knows about your sin. It's the talk of the town that you're sleeping with your sister. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows you're in the pocket of Rome. Everybody knows you're not working in our best interest. Everybody knows you're a Jew by name only. Everybody knows the murders of your fathers that you continue in today. If he had come from that approach, he wouldn't technically be wrong,
right,
in what he was saying, but he's not going to reach Agrippa at all. Agrippa is going to have these walls put up. He's probably going to have as close as he legally could have Paul killed for it. Those
right.
Kind of, yeah.
Well, and so I mean, and I think that is something that we could benefit from as Christians. How many times do we pursue the moral issues of the day, which I think that's important, right? Where the Bible speaks, we speak, and the Bible and Christianity throughout 2,000 years have talked about certain issues of the day because it's important. But how often do we get lost in the weeds of those issues, especially speaking to somebody that we want to see become a Christian? It's almost as if we present the gospel as hey, you have to get all of your life right. You have to change your opinions on certain issues. You have to figure out all of these things, and then Jesus is ready for you. And we don't see that. We don't see Paul doing that.
No. Jesus met Paul in the depth of his sin.
Right.
As far down that trail as he ever got, that's where Jesus met him. And I think that's an important part, not only of Paul's testimony, but of the reality of coming to Christ. As you were alluding to, I think that's the reality. We need a savior. And if we could save ourselves, what's Paul say? It's not by works so that no one may boast. It's by grace. If we could possibly save ourselves, we wouldn't have needed him,
right.
But the hole's too deep. We can't climb out.
Well, and I mean, maybe that's a tactic that we and those who are watching this can take in just sharing our story, as Paul shares his story. And we don't, I mean, I don't know your full story, Cole, but I don't believe you have the story like Paul.
I killed tons of people. No. That's
well, and,
yeah.
so yeah, I mean, it's just like, hey, you're sitting down across from your friend and drinking coffee, and you're like, hey, listen, if I didn't have Jesus, you wouldn't like me. I would be super selfish. I would manipulate situations to my advantage, and just sharing with people. There's a simple way that Jesus has changed us, and inviting them to. I mean, you don't even have to leave the conversation with a, hey, you need to make a decision now type thing. Because I mean, Paul sort of, his conclusion trying to get Agrippa to come to terms, alluding to the Old Testament, to the prophets, and getting Agrippa to the point where, hey, listen, buddy, if you believe the prophets, they talked about Jesus, and you have to make that intellectual leap to belief and life change. And then so at that point, Agrippa's like, whoa, just stop. You're not going to persuade me so quickly to become a Christian.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I wouldn't say that Paul leaves Agrippa's presence as a failure in presenting the gospel, even if Agrippa didn't respond right there or ever. He was faithful in the message, and that's what we have to pursue: is faithfulness with what we say and do as Christians, and how we live and act and speak.
Yeah, there was a band I loved in high school, Emory, Christian rock band. Just absolutely loved their stuff, and they had a line that drove me nuts. It was in their album, The Question, and at the end of this, as it's fading out, the music, it's just been real hard, hitting real heavy, and it fades out, and it says in a melodic tone, "It's not our job to make anyone believe." And for a while, that like would grind at me, but it is the true statement. It is a true statement there. It's not our job to make them believe. It is our job to present the gospel. It is their choice whether or not they believe. That was a hard lesson for me to learn. Maybe some arrogance of youth that was in there, like surely I could win them over. But, when we look at Jesus himself preached and many rejected him. The Apostle Paul preached and many rejected him. He had how many conversations, countless conversations. We don't have the number with Felix. And Felix left him in jail hoping for a bribe. He never repented and turned. And, as far as we know, Festus doesn't either. Here he has the gospel presented. He thinks it's foolishness. And, it's not our job to make anyone believe, but it is our job to go and preach.
Right. There's this old saying, there's no use giving a person a rose if you're going to cut off their nose first.
Okay.
The idea of, hey, this is a great message, but if you're going to offend somebody out the gate, and this goes kind of full circle, offend somebody out of the gate with addressing something that they're doing before presenting them the gospel, then it's pointless, right? If you throw up the walls, if you get the person throw up the walls. And something else I was thinking, I feel like we've tackled that idea. Slightly. I think Paul, in whenever he's talking to Agrippa, he doesn't use a lot of he alludes to the Old Testament. He doesn't quote necessarily from the Old Testament. And so I think maybe sometimes as Christians, we use a lot of church speak or Christianese, and we do this in church with visitors, and something that we have to be mindful of, throwing words out that maybe somebody has no idea. What is the atonement? What is propitiation? All of those things. I think we need to be able to adjust our language to those that we want to reach, to where we're speaking in a way that they understand. And I think Paul does this. A commentary, I'll share this with you. It says that Paul's task is defined more closely in language based on the description of the servant's commission in Isaiah 42:6. He is to open eyes that are blinded by sin, to convert people and bring them out of the realm of darkness into the light. Just and then it goes on. Those who respond to his call, to Paul's call, will obtain forgiveness of their sins and their appointed place among those who are sanctified by faith in Jesus. And then finally, just the author of the commentary says the theological language used here would probably be too deep for Agrippa to comprehend. It reflects a traditional Christian understanding of the nature of conversion, and is perhaps a summary for the reader of what Paul could have said more simply to Agrippa. And I think the commentators is specifically referring to what Luke has recorded here of what Paul said, and maybe it was verbatim, but it seems like Paul could have quoted a whole lot from the Old Testament. He could have quoted from Isaiah 42:6, which was sort of the idea that Israel was going to be a light to the Gentiles, and ultimately fulfilled in Christ. But he keeps it simple. And again, and the 17, I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles to whom I'm sending you, to open their eyes so that they turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a share among those who are sanctified by faith in me, which is what Jesus gave to Paul. But I think we have to be willing to adjust our language, to, as Jesus did, and as you said earlier, meet people where they are. And that, if you're able to make a good illustration based upon a person's career choice, we see Jesus doing that with his stories and the parables that he told, meeting people where they are, giving them language that they can understand, instead of just being like, hey, let me take you through the Romans road, right? All of sin. And what exactly is sin? Well, we don't have time to define. Let me get through what I'm saying. That's something that drives me crazy with people of other faiths, Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. They come to your door and they have this memorized track. They do. And you start asking questions, and it's almost as if they get this deer in the headlights. It's like, wait, no.
Yeah, you're not supposed to talk yet.
Yeah. Let me finish. But how often do we do that as Christians? It's like, I've got these passages memorized, and you can't say anything or ask questions because then it'll get me off track.
Yeah. Yep. I've told the story countless times. This poor gal, she's probably my age at the time. I was flying, and long hair at the time, a beard similar to this, gauges and a lip ring and some tattoos. And this gal got stuck sitting next to me on the airplane, and she didn't talk. She didn't look up. She looked at her lap the whole flight. Like, I somehow scared the snot out of this gal. And so toward the end, like, they announced we're coming in for the landing. She looks at me and starts giving me the Romans Road kind of talk. And she's got a Bible tract. She keeps trying to hand it to me, and I'm trying to explain to her, I'm a minister. Like, not only am I saved, but I would love to talk to you about Jesus. Like, this, I know him too, and I'm all excited about it. And she's like, not hearing anything I'm saying. And I think the example we see all throughout is it is a conversation. Paul does do some preaching, but there's oftentimes for people to follow up and ask questions. And I know when I get stuck in church language, when I get just dug in and I can't seem to get out of it, it's because I don't understand the concept well enough to communicate it in a way that people can understand.
Right.
I had a youth minister when I was a youth sponsor in college. I was helping teach a Bible study, and he took me aside after this Bible study. We had split in small groups, and he had come in and observed, and he said, like, those kids have no idea what you're saying in there. You might feel smart. They might think you're smart, but it's not going to lead to anything in their lives if you can't find a way to say it that they can understand. You're almost like the Pharisees using these high sounding words, and it's just like clanging cymbals. It doesn't mean anything. So that's my I guess my encouragement in that to people who may listen to this and find themselves in a spot where they don't know how to say it outside of some of those church words that aren't going to make sense, or they find themselves reverting to those, is to actively work on what those words mean. Like you mentioned sin, understanding sin is a Hebrew word that means missing the mark. It's an archery term. Like, when you explain it to somebody, they understand what sin is. The target's supposed to be God's will, and we keep missing it. We're all over the place. Sometimes we're backward, and the idea of repentance being getting back on track, turning our lives back to God's will, not just saying I'm sorry. Like, when we understand those words, ourselves, we can better communicate them to other people and better live the calling we've received. Yeah. Paul understood those things. And I think even the audience here understood those things. They just didn't like it.
Right.
The cost was
oh yeah. No, a really good book. I recommend to you and anybody who wants to read it. It's called God Space. I don't know if you've by Doug Pollock. I had to pull it up.
Okay.
God Space. It's just the additional title is Where Spiritual Conversations Happen Naturally. And it's such a good book. And I can tell you're pulling it up also. But it's just, it helps the reader sort of understand how to make sharing your faith more conversational and less not conversational. Sort of, as what we're having now is just where it's a natural, hey, we're meeting over coffee. I'm going to draw on a napkin or anything of that nature where, I'm going to get back to my notes.
That reminds me of Bill Hybels' book, Just Walk Across the Room. Same idea is, he says in there over and over again, people have to understand you're going to love them and still accept them as a friend, even if they reject Jesus. You're not to use your relationship as leverage. I'll reject you if you reject Jesus. That's not what we're called to.
Right. Well, it's sort of, and I'm sure you get this too. You're in ministry, somebody gets around you and they let a word slip. And then they instantly go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. My apologies." And I'm sure you do as I do. Hey, you're okay. It's like, especially if they're not a Christian. It's like, listen. And a friend recently was telling a story of, he made some friends and they found out that he was a minister, and he, had that whole awkward, you don't have to do that. And one of them was like, "Hey, I really appreciate that. This is who I am. And, I'm, the fact that you accept me with my language and my faults and how I am and not expect me to change is very comforting and it's very relaxing." So I think, I don't know. I wasn't making a point, I suppose, but,
I want
embracing people as they are.
Which is what Jesus does, and then Rachel Gilson is the book Born Again This Way. And she says in there, it's most of the way through the book, but she says for her, it came down to she loved Jesus more than she loved her sin. And that's where the change happens. You can't come to someone with a message demanding they clean up their life. I think we need to be honest and that Jesus will expect them to change. We shouldn't lie. But that he comes alongside you to clean up your mess. Like you're not in it by yourself, and you shouldn't clean it up. As you said much earlier, you shouldn't be trying to clean up your life to come to Jesus. You should come to Jesus and work with him on cleaning up your life. And, without the love of Jesus and Jesus' love working in you, it's not necessarily that it's a pointless effort, but ultimately is, you're going to have a shinier looking life going the wrong direction. It's the risk of being a little crass. It's like polishing a turd. The only one that makes it truly beautiful is Jesus. If it's just you're polishing up a whitewashed tomb. It may look good, but it's still death.
Right.
So.
Right. And I did have a final thought, one more thing to share or to throw out there. Paul uses the Old Testament to point to the gospel. I think as Christians, we don't need to be afraid of the Old Testament. In fact, we need to recognize that Christians for several decades, maybe more, maybe a century or more, were using the Old Testament to point to Jesus. They were using the prophets and the law, I dare say. They were using everything to point to Jesus. And so I think if we're not careful, we make the gospel a New Testament thing. And as one individual once said, we unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament by mistake, and we make it irrelevant and unimportant But if there is no Old Testament, right? If there's no story of Abraham, if there's no covenant with Abraham, there's no covenant with the world through Jesus. There's no seed. There's no promise. So I think we've got to make sure that we are aware and understanding of what's in the Old Testament and where Jesus is found in the Old Testament, right? I mean, we're not applying all of those laws. And if you want to boil a kid goat in its mother's milk,
or wear fabric that's part,
yes.
two different materials,
yes.
One of the cool things the Old Testament does that we miss out on so much when we don't read it, even like especially the book of Leviticus, I'll say, is you see the gravity of the law. And we live in a day and age where it's the popular thing to excuse your sin or downplay your faults, right? We live in a fat pride time, right? So live a terribly unhealthy life. That's fine. That's who you are. And it's like, well, no, they're dying. The leading cause of death in the United States, embrace this sin, embrace that sin. That's who you are. And it's this challenge to make that your identity. When you spend time in the Old Testament, you begin to feel the weight of your sin. And that's important because it also helps you to understand the glory of the cross. If you were pretty good, you just needed that bump over the finish line. That's such a downplay of what Jesus did. The reality is we weren't even close. When you go read the hundreds of laws in the Old Testament and you see, most of us aren't doing some of those we would all say are heinous, though there are people today who still do. But when you see all these other little things that we break on a daily basis, that was us missing the mark of God's will, was us being further and further separated from him and the love that he offers. We understand the grace that's been given us, and we can present the gospel like Paul does, where he says, this was who I was. I was a despicable mess. And it's not, we're not trying to keep up with a guy that has the, I was living on the streets. I was a heroin addict testimony. We're not trying to up our testimony, keep up with him. We just understand the weight of our sin. I was a jerk. I used people and I wasn't even aware I was doing it. I just, I didn't value people, but since Christ and the work Christ has done in me, I value people. I see people the way he sees them. I love them the way he loves them. And I'm not perfect, but way better than I used to be.
Right.
Way better. So,
right. Yeah, definitely.
Well, awesome, William. I know you're busy today, and we can all blame Matt Wilson. We got to record a little late today, so make sure you give Matt a hard time. But I appreciate you making time. I know with a new child in the house, everything's a lot busier, and your brain moves a lot slower. So thank you for powering through and being with us today, William.
Yeah, no, the way that I win is my brain always moves slow. So, it's just, it's good.
It's like conditioning. You were just conditioning ahead of time. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Definitely.
Well, thank you again, William.
Yes, indeed. Have a good one.
Welcome to this week's. No. All right. Well, I'll catch you next time, William. This one's already rolling.